It started on a Saturday at my grandmother's house during her annual summer lunch. The kind where everyone shows up with cornbread and casseroles, and the photo albums come out like clockwork. My cousin Tessa was there, hair perfect, smile curated, phone in her hand like always. My husband, Jake, sat beside her, too close, legs angled just slightly in her direction. I didn't think much of it then. They laughed. She touched his arm. I told myself I was imagining it. If you've ever uncovered betrayal where you least expected it, like, subscribe and stay tuned for stories where loyalty breaks and justice comes from the quietest corners. But when we posed for that family photo, and I saw the way his hand lingered just behind her back, just barely grazing, just enough to notice if you were watching, I knew. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't cousinly. It was calculated. That night, I scrolled through his phone while he showered. I hadn't done that in years. But I had to know. And there it was. Texts. Deleted photos recovered from the cloud. A voice note from her, whispering, "You don't have to go back to her tonight." I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I closed the browser, put it back where I found it, and walked outside barefoot onto the porch where my grandmother rocked gently, humming to herself in the dark. "Tessa's not staying here tonight, is she?" I asked. My grandmother stopped rocking, looked at me, said nothing. But her hand reached for mine. That's when I knew I wasn't going to be alone in this. The next morning, my grandmother made 2 cups of coffee. She didn't ask if I'd slept, because she knew I hadn't. She handed me the mug with the little blue flower on the handle, the one she always gave me when I was a child and hurting. We sat outside, watching the mist rise from the lawn. She didn't ask what happened. She asked what I wanted. That's how my grandmother speaks. Not in questions that chase drama, but in questions that protect your dignity. "I want them gone," I said. "Both of them." But not loudly. Just erased. She nodded once. Tessa was still asleep in the guest room. Jake had left early, claiming he had a few things to finish before Monday. I didn't bother replying. Later that day, my grandfather came out of the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. My grandmother met him on the porch, whispered something, and he nodded the way she had. My grandparents didn't believe in yelling. They believed in order. And betrayal, especially under their roof, was a kind of mess they would not tolerate. That evening, I overheard my grandmother on the phone with her lawyer. Calm. Controlled. "Yes, I'd like to reassign the trust we had set aside for Tessa's education. No, not to her. To my granddaughter. The one who didn't sleep with her cousin's husband." She said it like a statement of fact. Not with venom. Just clarity. The trust was worth over $60,000. They'd been saving it for Tessa since she was 10. The next day, she got a call from her college's financial aid office. A week later, she dropped out. She never called me, never apologized. But I did receive a message from her mother, my aunt, begging me to forgive and forget. I didn't reply, because the truth was, I hadn't gotten revenge. My grandparents had. And they weren't finished yet. The lawyer came by 2 weeks later. My grandfather cleaned up the sunroom before he arrived, like he always did when paperwork mattered. They didn't ask me to leave the room. They didn't even pretend I wasn't part of the conversation. They wanted me there, to see the weight of legacy shift. My grandparents had no illusions about time. They were in their late 70s, still sharp, but aware of the clock. They had built a modest but steady life. 3 properties, investments, a collection of antique heirlooms that had been appraised more than once. And until this summer, the plan had always been to divide everything equally among the grandchildren. But betrayal has a way of redrawing maps. "I won't have her inherit 1 inch of this house," my grandmother said, sliding a file across the table. The lawyer opened it, pre-drafted changes. The entire estate, minus a few charitable contributions, would go to me.
Sole beneficiari.
The antique piano?
Mine.
The rental property?
Mine.
The jewelry passed down from her grandmother? Mine. She used our roof as her hiding place, my grandfather added, calm but cold. She won't benefit from our silence. The lawyer asked if I wanted to say anything. I didn't. I just signed where they asked me to. Tessa still hadn't apologized. Jake was still sending meaningless texts like, "Can we talk?" and "You don't understand what it was." He didn't know I did understand. It was selfishness, boredom,
Ego.
and maybe worst of all, it was preventable. The next family gathering was awkwardly canceled. My grandmother told everyone she wasn't feeling up to hosting this year, which wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. The truth was, she had no interest in playing pretend anymore. Tessa tried calling, then texting, then writing a letter that arrived in handwriting that hadn't been hers since high school. I read it once. It was all excuses and half remorse. She missed our bond. She didn't mean to hurt me. But what she missed most was access to my husband, to my grandparents' affection, to money she thought she could always count on. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then I locked it away, not for keepsake, but as evidence, because someday she might say, "I didn't know it mattered that much." And I'll be ready to say, "You never knew what you had to begin with." Jake thought I'd fold. That much was clear in the way he kept texting me. Nothing wild, nothing desperate, just enough to keep a tether tied. "Let's talk this through. You're overreacting." It didn't mean anything. That last one was my favorite. As if sleeping with someone I shared childhood summers with didn't mean something. He didn't know about the trust transfer, or the will, or the fact that Tessa had dropped out of college and was now working part-time at a boutique that paid just enough to cover her phone bill. He just knew I hadn't filed for divorce yet, and to him, that meant the door was still cracked. But I wasn't waiting. I was preparing. I met with a lawyer of my own, this one young, sharp, and very interested in digital forensics. I handed over Jake's phone records, screenshots, proof of gifts sent to Tessa under fake names, one of which I recognized from a joke he'd made years earlier about his spy movie alias. We built a case not just for infidelity, but for premeditated betrayal, and I used it to structure my divorce demands like a checklist. Half of our savings?
Mine.
His name removed from the house deed?
Done.
Spousal support? Waived, because I had something better. The satisfaction of watching him walk away from everything with nothing but his gym bag and the keys to his used car. The final meeting was short. He wore a suit, still clinging to that executive presence, like the right tie might undo the truth. He asked if I wanted to talk, off the record. I didn't.
He signed.
And that was it. Outside, the rain had started. I didn't rush. I stood under the awning and watched him walk away, soaked, jacket clinging to him like a second skin of failure. I don't think he knew how deeply my grandparents' choices had rewritten his consequences. How their quiet support had turned me into a woman he couldn't negotiate with anymore. At home, I opened a drawer and took out the envelope, the one with Tessa's letter. I reread it, not for sentiment, for certainty. I was never going back, and they were never going forward. The family reunion wasn't my idea. It was my grandmother's. The same woman who'd rewritten her will and redirected a trust fund decided to host Thanksgiving as if nothing had happened, at least outwardly. But I knew her. This wasn't forgiveness. This was theater. She invited everyone, including Tessa, including Tessa's mother. She even extended a courtesy email to Jake, who, wisely, never responded. My grandmother had orchestrated this dinner not to heal, but to show that healing had already happened without the people who thought they were central to it. The table was long, linen pressed, candles flickering like the wick of a slow-burn truth. I came alone, head held high. Tessa sat near the far end, face thinner, quieter than I'd remembered. She didn't make eye contact. Her mother tried twice to engage me in small talk. I nodded politely, sipped my wine, let the tension settle like fog on glass. Then came dessert. My grandmother stood up, a slice of pecan pie on her plate, fork untouched. "I want to say something," she said, just before we cut into this pie. The room fell still. She didn't look at Tessa. She looked at me. This family was built on two things, respect and memory. And when someone forgets how to respect, the rest of us remember who they are. Then she sat down. No names were said. No apologies demanded. But the silence afterward was louder than any confession could have been. I looked across the table, directly at Tessa. She blinked. I didn't. I leaned forward and spoke for the first time all evening. "I'm grateful for many things this year," I said, voice calm. Mostly for the people who chose honesty when it was easier to lie. And for the family who reminded me that blood means very little when it runs cold. I raised my glass, not in a toast, in closure, and then I let the conversation move on without her. She left quietly, before the dishes were cleared. Her mother followed, murmuring thanks she didn't mean. And just like that, the space they once occupied in our family closed up behind them like a door sealed tight. My grandparents smiled at me across the table. No words, just the quiet satisfaction of justice served warm. If you've ever been betrayed and answered with dignity instead of destruction, like, subscribe, and stay for more stories where the strongest revenge is rising without noise.